Chosen one. Something is shifting around you right now, and even if you can't fully explain it, you can feel it in your spirit. The same people who tried to delay you, silence your voice, and quietly block your path are beginning to unravel in ways they never expected. What was once hidden behind closed doors, whispered in private conversations, and disguised as coincidence, is now rising to the surface. You were never imagining the resistance. You were never overthinking the tension. There were real forces working against you, intentional decisions made to keep you small, calculated efforts to make you doubt yourself and step back from what was meant for you. But here is the truth they failed to understand. Every move they made against you is now turning into undeniable evidence against them, and the very traps they set are becoming the reason they are being exposed. You didn't break under the pressure. You didn't lose your direction. And you didn't give up. And now, your endurance is about to reveal everything that was done in the dark. If this message is already resonating with you on a deeper level, take a moment right now to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment, "I am ready," to align yourself with this message and help it reach other chosen ones who are standing at the edge of the same breakthrough. Because what is unfolding in your life is not random. It is not accidental. And it is not something anyone can stop anymore. They never expected you to make it this far. And that truth sits quietly beneath everything that is unfolding right now, like a hidden current finally rising to the surface after being ignored for too long. From the very beginning, there was an assumption placed on you, a silent conclusion people reached without ever truly understanding who you were. They looked at your circumstances, your background, your moments of struggle, and they made a decision about your limits. Not out loud, not directly, but in the subtle ways people reveal what they believe. In the way opportunities were given to others before you. In the way your ideas were overlooked, your presence underestimated, your potential quietly dismissed as something that would never fully materialize. They thought pressure would break you, that resistance would exhaust you, that isolation would eventually make you question your own worth and step back voluntarily. And for a moment, there were times when even you felt the weight of that pressure pressing in on your chest. Times when you wondered if maybe they were right, if maybe this path was not meant for you, if maybe the struggle itself was a sign to stop. But what they never accounted for was something deeper than external validation, something stronger than temporary doubt, something that cannot be measured by appearances or predicted by people who only see the surface. They did not account for your ability to endure without recognition, to continue without applause, to keep moving forward even when there was no clear evidence that anything was changing. While they were watching outcomes, you were building strength. While they were measuring success through visible milestones, you were developing resilience in the unseen places where real transformation happens. And that is why their expectations failed. Because they were looking at the wrong indicators, judging your journey based on external timelines instead of internal growth. They thought silence meant weakness, but your silence was never emptiness. It was preparation. It was observation. It was the quiet gathering of clarity, while everything around you tried to distract, discourage, and delay you. You were learning things in that silence that they could never understand. Lessons about patience, about discernment, about how to move with intention instead of reaction. And now, the very thing they misinterpreted is becoming the reason you are standing where you are today. Because when someone learns how to survive without constant validation, they become dangerous in a way that cannot be controlled. When someone discovers how to trust their own inner direction instead of relying on external approval, they move differently. They see differently. They respond differently. And that difference is what carried you further than anyone expected. They assumed you would need support in the same way they do, that you would depend on recognition, that you would slow down when things did not immediately reward you. But you didn't. You adapted. You adjusted. You kept going, step by step, even when the progress felt invisible. And while they were waiting for you to fall, you were quietly outgrowing the version of yourself they thought they understood. There is something powerful about being underestimated, something that works in your favor even when it feels frustrating in the moment. Because when people underestimate you, they stop paying close attention. They stop preparing for your growth. They stop recognizing the signs that you are evolving beyond their expectations. And in that space, you are free to develop without interference, free to become without constant scrutiny, free to build a foundation that is not shaped by other people's opinions. That is exactly what happened in your life. While they were distracted, while they were confident in their assumptions, you were transforming in ways they could not see. You were gaining clarity about who you are and what you are capable of. You were strengthening your ability to handle pressure without collapsing under it. You were learning how to move through uncertainty without losing your sense of direction. And all of that growth accumulated quietly until it reached a point where it could no longer be hidden, where your presence alone began to challenge the narrative they had created about you. Now they are looking at you differently, not because you suddenly changed overnight, but because the evidence of your endurance has become undeniable. You are still here. You are still moving forward. You are still progressing despite everything that was placed in your path. And that reality forces them to confront something they were not prepared to face: the possibility that they were wrong about you from the very beginning. That realization is uncomfortable for people who have invested in a certain perception of you, because it means they have to question their own judgment, their own assumptions, their own role in what you went through. Some will try to ignore it, pretending nothing has changed. Some will try to minimize your progress, framing it as luck or coincidence. Some will even attempt to rewrite the narrative, acting as if they always believed in you, as if they were supportive all along. But the truth remains the same, regardless of how they respond. You made it further than they expected, and you did it without becoming what they tried to reduce you to. That is why your presence now carries a different energy, a quiet confidence that does not need to announce itself, a grounded awareness that does not depend on external approval. You are no longer moving from a place of trying to prove yourself. You are moving from a place of knowing who you are. And that shift changes everything. Because when you stop trying to convince others of your worth, you begin to embody it in a way that speaks louder than any explanation ever could. People can feel it, even if they cannot fully understand it. They can sense that something about you is different, that you are not operating from the same place you used to. And that difference creates a natural separation between you and those who still see the world through the lens of competition, control, and limitation. They may not be able to articulate why you feel different, but they recognize that you are no longer accessible in the same way, that the version of you they once underestimated no longer exists. This is the part they never planned for, the part where your growth becomes visible, where your resilience becomes undeniable, where your continued presence becomes proof that everything they believed about your limits was incomplete. And this is also the moment where the energy begins to shift in your favor. Not because you are suddenly receiving something new, but because what you have been building internally is now aligning with what is unfolding externally. The path that once felt blocked begins to open in unexpected ways. Opportunities that once seemed out of reach start to appear without force. People who once overlooked you begin to take notice, not because you changed for them, but because you remained consistent with yourself. That is the power of endurance combined with authenticity. It creates a momentum that cannot be easily disrupted. And as this momentum builds, it reveals something even deeper about your journey. Something that goes beyond individual success or recognition. It shows that the obstacles you faced were not simply barriers meant to stop you. They were filters that refined you, challenges that strengthened your ability to navigate complexity without losing your center. Every moment you kept going when it would have been easier to quit added another layer of stability to your foundation. Every time you chose to trust your direction instead of external doubt reinforced your sense of self. And now, standing at this point in your journey, you can begin to see how those experiences were shaping you for something greater than what you originally imagined. Because making it this far was never just about reaching a specific outcome. It was about becoming someone who can sustain what is coming next. And that is something they could never predict. Because they were focused on outcomes while you were developing capacity. They were watching the surface while you were building depth. They were expecting immediate results while you were committing to long-term growth. And that difference in focus is what allowed you to move beyond their expectations without needing their approval. Now the roles have shifted in a way that cannot be reversed. You are no longer the one trying to catch up. You are the one setting a pace that others are struggling to understand. You are no longer confined by the limitations they placed on you. You are operating from a level of awareness that makes those limitations irrelevant. And as you continue moving forward, you will notice something that once seemed impossible. The same people who underestimated you are now trying to figure out how you did it, how you made it through, how you reached a place they never thought you would reach. But the answer is not something they can easily replicate, because it was built through moments they never saw, through decisions you made when no one was watching, through a level of persistence that cannot be imitated without going through the same process. And that is what makes your position now so significant. Because it is not based on external validation, it is rooted in internal transformation. It is not dependent on temporary circumstances. It is supported by a foundation that was tested under pressure and proven through experience. So as you stand here, in this moment where everything is beginning to shift, understand that making it this far was never accidental. It was the result of every choice you made to keep going. Every moment you chose growth over comfort. Every time you refused to let external limitations define your internal reality. And now, with that foundation in place, you are stepping into a phase of your journey that is not about proving anything to anyone, but about fully embodying everything you have become. What you went through was never random, and the deeper you reflect on it now, the more clearly you can see that the blocking you experienced was intentional, patterned, and far too precise to be dismissed as coincidence. At the time, it felt confusing, almost disorienting, like walking through a maze where every turn that seemed promising suddenly closed without explanation. Like doors that opened just enough for you to believe something was about to shift, only to shut at the exact moment you reached for them. There were opportunities that seemed aligned, conversations that felt promising, moments that carried the energy of breakthrough, and yet somehow, something always interfered at the last second. Plans changed without warning. People who once supported you shifted their tone or disappeared entirely. Situations that should have progressed naturally became unnecessarily complicated. And because none of it was obvious or direct, because there was no single event you could point to and say, "This is the reason," you were left questioning yourself, wondering if maybe you were overanalyzing, if maybe this was just how life unfolded, unpredictable and uneven. But what you were experiencing was not randomness. It was disruption, subtle and calculated, designed in a way that would never be easy to prove, but would still be powerful enough to slow you down. And this is where the complexity of your journey becomes important, because intentional blocking rarely announces itself clearly. It operates through patterns, through repeated interference, through small shifts that accumulate over time until they create a larger effect. It is not always loud or aggressive. In fact, it is often quiet, strategic, almost invisible to anyone who is not directly affected by it. That is why it took time for you to fully recognize what was happening, because you were dealing with something that was designed to look like coincidence. But your awareness has evolved, and now when you look back, the patterns are impossible to ignore. The same types of disruptions appearing at critical moments, the same kind of resistance emerging whenever you moved closer to something meaningful. The same feeling of being redirected just as you gained momentum. That is not chance. That is interference. And recognizing that truth is not about blaming or becoming consumed by what others did. It is about understanding the environment you are navigating so you can fully appreciate the strength it took to move through it. Because what makes your position now so powerful is not just that you endured difficulty, but that you endured targeted difficulty. Obstacles that were specifically aligned to slow your progress. Challenges that were not generic, but personal. Tailored to your path in ways that required more than just surface-level resilience. You had to develop discernment, the ability to sense what was real and what was not, to differentiate between genuine opportunities and situations that were never meant to move forward. You had to learn how to trust your intuition, even when external circumstances seemed unclear. How to keep moving without needing complete visibility. How to continue building without immediate confirmation. And that kind of growth cannot happen in an environment where everything flows easily. It requires friction. It requires resistance. It requires moments where you are forced to rely on something deeper than external evidence. That is exactly what those experiences were creating within you. A level of internal clarity that cannot be manipulated. A sense of direction that cannot be easily influenced by outside forces. Because once you learn how to navigate through intentional disruption, once you understand how to move forward even when things are being subtly redirected, you become far less dependent on external conditions aligning perfectly. You develop the ability to create momentum from within, to continue progressing even when the path is not fully visible, to recognize that delays do not always mean denial, and that interference does not always mean failure. This is the shift that changes everything, because it moves you from a reactive state to a grounded state, from constantly questioning what is happening to understanding why it is happening and how to move through it without losing your center. And as this awareness deepens, it begins to reveal something even more significant about your journey, something that goes beyond the obstacles themselves. It shows that the blocking you experienced was not just about slowing you down. It was also about revealing who and what was aligned with you, and who and what was not. Because when interference enters your path, it does not just affect outcomes, it exposes dynamics. It shows you how people respond under pressure, how situations shift when things become uncertain, how support changes when progress is not guaranteed. And through that exposure, you gain clarity that would have been impossible to achieve in a smoother environment. You begin to see which connections were stable and which were conditional, which opportunities were genuine and which were dependent on factors that could not sustain long-term growth. That clarity is invaluable, because it allows you to move forward with a level of awareness that protects your energy and aligns your efforts more precisely with what truly matters. And this is where the narrative begins to transform. Because what once felt like a series of setbacks starts to reveal itself as a process of refinement. Every delay removed something that was not meant to move forward with you. Every disruption exposed something that needed to be seen. Every redirection guided you away from paths that would not have supported your long-term alignment. And while that process was not easy, while it required patience, endurance, and a willingness to continue without full understanding, it ultimately positioned you in a place where your movement is no longer dependent on unstable foundations. You are no longer building on assumptions or external validation. You are building on clarity, on discernment, on a deeper understanding of how to navigate complexity without losing direction. And that is what makes this moment so significant. Because now, the patterns that once worked against you are beginning to lose their power. The same types of interference that once slowed you down are no longer as effective. Because you recognize them, you understand their nature, and you are no longer reacting to them in the same way. You have developed a different level of awareness, one that allows you to move with intention instead of uncertainty, to make decisions based on alignment instead of pressure, to continue progressing without needing every external condition to be perfect. And as a result, the environment around you begins to shift. The delays that once felt constant start to decrease. The resistance that once felt overwhelming becomes more manageable. The path that once seemed unclear begins to reveal itself with greater consistency. Not because the external world has suddenly changed entirely, but because you have changed in a way that alters how you interact with it. This is the moment where you begin to see the difference between being controlled by circumstances and navigating through them with awareness. You are no longer being pushed in different directions by every unexpected shift. You are choosing your direction based on a deeper understanding of what aligns with you. And that choice creates a different kind of momentum. One that is not easily disrupted because it is rooted in something more stable than external validation. This is also the moment where those who contributed to the interference begin to feel the shift, even if they cannot fully articulate it. Because the same patterns they relied on are no longer producing the same results. The same strategies that once slowed you down are no longer as effective. And that change creates a sense of instability on their side, because what they expected to continue working is no longer functioning in the same way. And in that instability, cracks begin to form. Not because you are actively exposing anything, but because the systems that were built on manipulation and control cannot sustain themselves indefinitely. When the person they were trying to control or limit no longer responds in the same way, the entire dynamic begins to unravel. And that unraveling is not something that happens all at once. It is gradual, subtle at first, then increasingly visible as the inconsistencies become harder to ignore. And as this process continues, the truth that was once hidden beneath layers of subtle interference begins to surface more clearly, not through confrontation, but through contrast. The difference between authenticity and manipulation becomes more visible. The difference between genuine alignment and strategic positioning becomes easier to recognize. And in that clarity, people begin to see what was always there, but not fully understood before. And this is where your journey reaches another level of significance. Because you are no longer just someone who endured challenges, you are someone who navigated intentional complexity and came out with a level of awareness that cannot be easily shaken. You understand now that not every delay is random, that not every obstacle is neutral, that sometimes the path includes resistance that is designed to test not just your strength, but your ability to remain aligned with yourself despite external interference. And because you have moved through that process, because you have developed the discernment to recognize patterns and the resilience to continue without losing direction, you are now operating from a place that is far more stable than before. And from that place, your movement becomes more precise, your decisions become more intentional, and your progress becomes less dependent on external conditions and more rooted in internal clarity. This is the shift that marks the transition from being affected by the environment to navigating it with awareness, from being slowed down by hidden interference to moving forward with a level of understanding that allows you to bypass what once held you back. And as you continue on this path, you will notice that what once felt confusing now feels clear. What once felt chaotic now feels structured. And what once felt like random setbacks now reveals itself as part of a larger process that was shaping you into someone capable of handling what comes next. And as all of this continues to unfold, you begin to witness something that once would have seemed impossible. Their plan is no longer working the way they intended. And in real time, it is starting to turn back on them in ways they cannot control or contain. What was once carefully constructed, layered with subtlety and hidden behind calculated timing, is now beginning to show cracks. Not because you forced it into the light, but because systems built on manipulation eventually collapse under the weight of their own contradictions. In the beginning, their strategy felt effective, almost seamless, because it relied on invisibility, on the assumption that no one would connect the patterns, that no one would question the inconsistencies, that no one would look closely enough to see what was actually happening beneath the surface. And for a while, that assumption worked in their favor. Because when something is hidden well enough, it does not need to be perfect. It only needs to go unnoticed. But what they failed to account for was time. And more importantly, they failed to account for the fact that repeated actions, no matter how subtle, leave traces. Every small interference, every quiet redirection, every carefully placed obstacle was part of a larger pattern. And patterns, no matter how well disguised, eventually reveal themselves when observed over a long enough period. And now, you are standing at the point where those patterns are no longer aligning with the narrative they tried to maintain. The story they constructed is beginning to lose its coherence. The explanations they once relied on are no longer holding up under closer attention. The same people who once accepted things at face value are starting to notice details that do not quite make sense. Small inconsistencies that begin to accumulate into something larger, something that cannot be easily dismissed. And the more they try to maintain control of the narrative, the more pressure they place on a structure that was never designed to withstand scrutiny. Because manipulation requires constant maintenance, it requires continuous adjustment, continuous explanation, continuous effort to keep everything aligned in a way that appears natural. And the moment that maintenance becomes strained, the entire structure begins to falter. This is what is happening now. They are trying to hold together something that is already beginning to fall apart, and in doing so, they are exposing more than they realize. Every attempt to correct a previous action creates new inconsistencies. Every effort to reinforce the narrative introduces additional layers that do not fully align with what came before. And over time, those layers begin to contradict each other in ways that become increasingly difficult to hide. This is the nature of something that is not rooted in truth. It cannot remain stable under pressure. It cannot sustain itself when examined closely. It cannot adapt indefinitely without revealing its weaknesses. And as this process continues, you begin to notice a shift, not just in what is happening around you, but in how people are responding. The same individuals who once seemed certain in their positions are becoming less confident. The same voices that once supported the narrative without question are beginning to hesitate. There is a subtle but undeniable change in tone, a shift from certainty to uncertainty, from confidence to caution. And this shift is not happening because you are actively convincing anyone of anything. It is happening because the reality of the situation is becoming harder to ignore. People are beginning to see for themselves, to connect the dots without needing external guidance, to recognize that something is not as it was presented. And that recognition is powerful. Because when someone arrives at a conclusion on their own, it is far more difficult to reverse than when it is imposed from the outside. This is why their plan is backfiring in real time. Because it is not just collapsing internally, it is being observed externally in ways that were never intended. And as more people begin to see what is happening, the pressure increases, not just on the structure itself, but on the individuals maintaining it. They are forced to respond, to explain, to justify actions that were never meant to be examined this closely. And in that response, more is revealed. Because when someone is trying to protect something that is not fully aligned with truth, their explanations often create more questions than answers. They begin to overcompensate, to provide details that do not fully match the situation, to shift their position in ways that are noticeable to those paying attention. And each of these responses adds to the overall picture, building a clearer understanding of what has been happening beneath the surface. And through all of this, your role remains the same. You are not chasing exposure. You are not forcing confrontation. You are simply continuing to stand in your own alignment, allowing the contrast between authenticity and manipulation to become visible on its own. That is what makes this moment so significant. Because the truth does not need to be aggressively defended when it is allowed to reveal itself through consistency. You are not trying to prove anything. You are simply remaining consistent with who you are and what you know to be real. And that consistency becomes a reference point, something stable that others can compare against the shifting narrative around you. The more they try to adjust, the more noticeable the contrast becomes. Because while their position changes in response to pressure, yours remains grounded in something deeper. And that difference creates clarity, not just for you, but for anyone observing the situation. It becomes easier to see which side is reacting and which side is steady, which side is trying to control perception, and which side is simply existing in truth. And as this clarity spreads, it begins to reshape the environment in subtle but meaningful ways. Opportunities that were once influenced by hidden dynamics begin to shift toward more transparent processes. Conversations that were once controlled by underlying agendas become more open and direct. The overall energy begins to move away from manipulation and toward alignment. Not all at once, but gradually, as more people become aware of what has been happening. And this shift is not just external. It also affects you internally, reinforcing your understanding of why you experienced what you did and how you were able to move through it. You begin to see that your ability to remain grounded, to continue without reacting impulsively, to trust your own perception even when things were unclear, was not just resilience. It was preparation. It was what allowed you to reach this point where the truth is becoming visible without you having to force it. Because if you had reacted differently, if you had tried to fight every moment of interference directly, if you had allowed yourself to be pulled into the same patterns of control and reaction, the outcome might have been very different. But you didn't. You stayed centered, even when it was difficult. Even when it would have been easier to respond emotionally. Even when the lack of clarity created discomfort. And that choice is what positioned you here, in a place where the plan that once worked against you is now unraveling without your intervention. And as this unraveling continues, It reveals something even more important about the nature of your journey, something that goes beyond the immediate situation. It shows that truth, when aligned with consistency, does not need to be forced into visibility. It emerges naturally over time, as contradictions within false structures become impossible to maintain. It shows that manipulation, no matter how sophisticated, cannot sustain itself indefinitely, because it requires too many variables to remain perfectly aligned. And eventually, those variables begin to conflict with each other. And it shows that when you remain grounded in your own alignment, when you do not allow external interference to pull you away from your center, you create a stability that cannot be easily disrupted. A presence that becomes increasingly difficult to ignore as everything else around it shifts. This is where the dynamic changes completely, because you are no longer in a position of being affected by what others are doing. You are in a position where their actions are revealing themselves in contrast to your consistency. And that shift removes the need for you to engage in the same level of effort they are exerting. Because while they are trying to maintain something unstable, you are simply continuing to build on something solid. And over time, that difference becomes more and more apparent, until it reaches a point where it can no longer be overlooked. And when that point is reached, the narrative that once seemed controlled begins to open up, allowing a clearer understanding of what has been happening to emerge, not through force, but through the natural consequence of what cannot be sustained any longer. And as everything begins to reveal itself more clearly, you start to understand something that changes the way you see your entire journey. You were never in competition the way they thought you were. You were chosen in a way that operates beyond the systems they tried to control. And that distinction is what they could never fully comprehend. Because from their perspective, everything is about positioning, about strategy, about knowing the right people, saying the right things, aligning themselves in ways that increase their chances of being selected. They believe outcomes are determined by calculated effort alone, by how well someone can navigate the external game, by how effectively they can influence perception and control narratives. And within that framework, it makes sense that they would see you as a competitor, as someone who entered the same space and somehow disrupted what they believed was already secured. But what they never understood is that you were not operating within that same framework to begin with. You were not trying to win a position through manipulation. You were not trying to outmaneuver anyone. You were not building your path based on comparison or control. You were moving differently, guided by something that does not always make sense from the outside. Something that prioritizes alignment over appearance, substance over strategy, consistency over performance. And because that way of moving is not always visible in the same way, it is often underestimated, dismissed as passive or ineffective by those who rely heavily on external tactics. They assumed that because you were not playing the same game, you were not capable of reaching the same outcome. They believed that without the same level of visible maneuvering, without the same type of networking, without the same overt attempts to secure opportunities, you would eventually fall behind. That your path would stall while theirs progressed. But what they failed to see is that being chosen is not always about who positions themselves the most aggressively. It is about who aligns with what is needed at a deeper level. And that alignment cannot be forced. It cannot be fabricated. It cannot be sustained through performance alone. It requires authenticity. It requires integrity. It requires a level of internal coherence that becomes evident over time, even if it is not immediately recognized. This is why your journey looked different, why your progress did not follow the same visible patterns, why there were moments where it seemed like you were being overlooked while others were moving ahead. Because your path was not built on immediate recognition. It was built on long-term alignment, on becoming someone who could carry what was meant for you without needing to manipulate the process to receive it. And that kind of preparation often happens in ways that are not publicly acknowledged, in spaces where growth is internal rather than external, where the focus is not on appearing ready, but on actually becoming ready. You were developing qualities that are not always measurable in the moment. Things like discernment, patience, resilience, the ability to remain grounded under pressure, the ability to stay aligned with your values, even when it would have been easier to compromise. And while those qualities were forming within you, others were focused on maintaining appearances, on securing positions through external means, on building structures that looked strong, but were not necessarily supported by the same level of internal stability. And for a time, it may have seemed like their approach was more effective, like their progress was more visible, like their outcomes were more immediate. But visibility is not always an accurate reflection of sustainability. What is built quickly through external influence often requires constant maintenance to remain in place, while what is built through alignment tends to stabilize over time, becoming more solid, more consistent, more resistant to disruption. This is the difference you are beginning to see now, because when the moment of selection arrived, when the decision was made, it was not based solely on who appeared most prepared on the surface. It was based on something deeper, something that recognized the difference between performance and authenticity, between constructed readiness and actual capacity. And that is why you were chosen. Not by accident, not by chance, but by alignment. The person or situation that selected you was responding to something real, something that could not be replicated through strategy alone, something that had been developing within you over time without needing constant external validation. And this is the part that creates the most confusion for those who were relying on a different approach. Because from their perspective, it does not add up. They look at the situation and try to understand how you reached this position without following the same steps, without engaging in the same level of visible effort, without playing the game in the way they expected. And because they cannot see the internal process that brought you here, they default to assumptions, to questioning the fairness of the outcome, to believing that something must have been overlooked or misjudged. But what they are really confronting is the limitation of their own understanding, the realization that not everything operates according to the rules they are familiar with. And that realization can be uncomfortable, especially for those who have invested heavily in a system that prioritizes control and strategy over alignment and authenticity. Because it challenges the belief that outcomes can always be engineered, that success can always be secured through effort alone, that positioning is the most important factor in determining who is chosen. And when that belief is challenged, it creates tension, not just externally, but internally as well. They are forced to reconcile the difference between what they thought would happen and what actually happened, between the narrative they constructed and the reality they are now witnessing. And that tension often manifests in different ways, in frustration, in confusion, in attempts to rationalize the outcome in a way that fits their existing framework. Some may try to minimize your selection, to attribute it to luck or timing rather than acknowledging the deeper alignment that made it possible. Some may attempt to find flaws, to identify reasons why the decision does not make sense, to reinforce their belief that they should have been chosen instead. And some may simply struggle silently, recognizing on some level that there is something about your journey they do not fully understand, but cannot easily dismiss. But regardless of how they respond, the truth remains unchanged. You were chosen because you were aligned with what was needed. not because you forced your way into a position. And that alignment is what gives your position stability, because it is not dependent on maintaining an image or controlling a narrative. It is supported by something more consistent, something that does not require constant adjustment to remain valid. And as you step further into this understanding, it begins to change the way you move forward, because you no longer feel the need to compare your path to others. You no longer feel the pressure to validate your position through external approval. You no longer feel the need to explain how you got here in a way that makes sense to everyone. You understand that your journey is not meant to be fully understood by those who are operating from a different perspective. And that is not a limitation. It is a reflection of the fact that your path was not built according to the same rules. This is where your confidence begins to shift from something that needs reinforcement to something that exists naturally, because it is rooted in experience rather than assumption. You know what you have been through. You know the process that shaped you. You know the decisions you made when no one was watching. The moments where you chose integrity over convenience, where you chose patience over immediate gratification, where you chose alignment over manipulation. And that knowledge creates a sense of certainty that does not need to be constantly reaffirmed, because it is not based on external validation. It is based on lived experience. And that certainty allows you to move forward with a level of clarity that was not available to you before, because you are no longer trying to fit into a system that was never designed for you. You are operating from a place that is aligned with who you are and what you are capable of carrying. And as you continue to move in that direction, you will begin to see that being chosen was not the final destination. It was the beginning of a new phase, one that requires you to fully embody the qualities that brought you here in the first place. Because alignment is not something that can be temporarily accessed and then ignored. It is something that must be maintained through consistent action, through continued awareness, through a willingness to stay true to what you know, even when external pressures attempt to pull you in a different direction. And this is where your journey continues to evolve. Not as a competition to be won, but as a path to be lived. One that reflects the truth of who you are, rather than the expectations of those who never fully understood your process. And as you continue moving forward with this new level of clarity and alignment, something becomes increasingly impossible to ignore. Their obsession with you is no longer hidden. It is no longer subtle, and it is revealing far more about them than anything you could have ever exposed yourself. What once operated quietly behind the scenes is now surfacing through their own behavior, through the way they react to your presence, through the way your name continues to appear in conversations you are not even part of, through the way your progress seems to trigger something they cannot control. They watch you more closely than they would ever admit, analyzing your moves, interpreting your silence, trying to understand how you continue to move forward despite everything they put in place. And in doing so, they are slowly unraveling the very image they worked so hard to maintain. Because obsession is difficult to disguise. It leaks through tone, through timing, through patterns of attention that become too consistent to ignore. People begin to notice how often your name comes up, how frequently your actions are referenced, how much energy is being directed toward you without a clear reason. And that attention, when viewed from the outside, does not look like confidence. It looks like fixation, like insecurity trying to mask itself as concern or authority. This is where the shift becomes undeniable, because instead of controlling the narrative, they are now contributing to its exposure. Every reaction they have creates another point of reference, another moment where their intentions become more visible. Every attempt to discredit you draws more attention to you. Every effort to monitor you reveals their lack of control over their own focus. And the more they engage in this behavior, the more it contrasts with your approach. Because while they are reacting, you are simply continuing. While they are watching, you are moving. While they are trying to understand you, you are becoming more fully yourself without needing to explain it. That contrast is what exposes everything, not through confrontation, but through difference. People can feel the imbalance between someone who is grounded and someone who is fixated, between someone who is focused on their path and someone who is distracted by another person's progress. And in that awareness, perception begins to shift naturally, without you having to say a word. You are not the one drawing attention to their behavior. They are doing that on their own, through the consistency of their reactions, through the inability to detach, through the visible discomfort your growth creates in them. And this is where you begin to understand something that redefines how you see the entire situation. You were never just someone they tried to block. You became a mirror that reflects everything they have not resolved within themselves. Your progress highlights their stagnation. Your alignment exposes their misalignment. Your consistency reveals their instability. And that reflection is something they cannot escape, no matter how much they try to redirect their focus. Because as long as you continue to move forward in your truth, you will remain a point of contrast, a reminder of what cannot be controlled through manipulation or strategy. And while they may try to manage that discomfort by increasing their attention on you, by attempting to regain a sense of control through observation or commentary, all it does is deepen the exposure, making it clearer to everyone around them that the issue was never you. It was always something within them that your presence simply brought to the surface. And as this quiet exposure continues to unfold without you forcing a single moment of it, you begin to notice something even more powerful taking place around you. The shift is no longer hidden. It is becoming public, and the way people see you is changing in real time. Not because you demanded recognition, but because consistency has a way of revealing truth more clearly than any explanation ever could. At first, it is subtle, almost unspoken. A change in tone when your name is mentioned, a pause before someone repeats something negative about you, a hesitation that was not there before. People who once accepted certain narratives without question are now observing more carefully, comparing what they hear with what they actually see. And what they see does not match what they were told. They see someone who remained steady under pressure, someone who did not react impulsively, someone who did not engage in the same patterns of manipulation that were being used against them. And that difference creates doubt in the minds of those who once believed a version of the story that is now falling apart. The shift continues to grow as more people begin to align their perception with reality rather than assumption. Support that once felt distant begins to move closer, not in a dramatic or overwhelming way, but in a steady and genuine way that carries far more weight than superficial approval ever could. Conversations begin to change, not because you are controlling them, but because people are adjusting their understanding based on what they now recognize as truth. Respect that was once withheld begins to surface, not always directly, but in the way people listen to you more carefully, in the way they consider your perspective with greater seriousness, in the way they acknowledge your presence without needing external validation to justify it. And while all of this is happening around you, something equally important is happening within you. Your relationship with recognition itself is changing. You are no longer seeking it in the same way, because you understand that what is being given to you now is not based on performance. It is based on alignment. It is not something you have to maintain through constant effort. It is something that exists because you remained consistent when it would have been easier to compromise. This is what creates a different kind of confidence, one that is not dependent on external confirmation, one that does not fluctuate based on how others respond to you, one that remains stable even as circumstances shift. And as this confidence grows, it allows you to move through this public shift without becoming consumed by it. Because while attention is increasing, while perception is changing, you understand that your purpose was never to be defined by how many people recognize you, but by how aligned you remain with what brought you here in the first place. This is where many people lose their balance. When the external world begins to reflect back what they have been building internally, there is a temptation to shift focus toward maintaining that reflection rather than continuing the internal process that created it. But you are not here to perform for perception. You are here to remain grounded in truth, regardless of how it is received. And that understanding allows you to navigate this phase with clarity instead of pressure, with intention instead of reaction. At the same time, those who once operated from a place of control are now experiencing the opposite. The public nature of this shift is something they cannot manage in the same way they managed hidden dynamics. Because what is visible to many cannot be easily manipulated. What is observed collectively cannot be controlled by a single narrative. And as more people become aware, as more perspectives begin to align with reality, the space for distortion becomes smaller. The ability to redirect perception becomes more limited. This is the moment where the imbalance begins to correct itself, not through confrontation, but through visibility. And that visibility does not require you to explain yourself repeatedly or defend your position. It simply requires you to remain consistent with who you are, to continue moving in alignment with what you know, to allow the difference between authenticity and manipulation to become increasingly clear without needing to force it. Because the more you stay grounded, the more everything else reveals itself naturally. The more the environment adjusts around that stability. The more people recognize what is real without needing to be convinced. And in that recognition, something powerful takes shape. Not just in how others see you, but in how your path continues to unfold. Because when perception aligns with truth, it creates space for opportunities that are no longer influenced by hidden interference. It creates connections that are based on clarity rather than assumption. It creates movement that is supported rather than obstructed. And this is where you begin to feel the difference in a tangible way. Not just as an internal sense of knowing, but as an external experience of things flowing with less resistance, of progress happening with more consistency, of alignment becoming visible in ways that were not possible before. And as you move through this phase, it becomes clear that this shift was not just about exposure, it was about realignment, about restoring balance in a way that allows you to continue forward without carrying the weight of what was never yours to hold in the first place. And as this realignment settles into place, and the external noise begins to lose its grip on your attention, you come to a deeper understanding that reshapes everything you thought this journey was about. This was never about revenge. It was never about proving anyone wrong. It was always about correction, about restoring balance in a way that could not have happened without everything unfolding exactly as it did. Because if this had been about revenge, you would have been pulled into the same patterns that were used against you, reacting to every move, defending every misunderstanding, trying to force the truth into visibility through confrontation. But that is not what happened, and that is not who you became. Instead, you moved through something far more complex. You learned how to remain steady when instability surrounded you, how to stay aligned when others tried to pull you off course, how to continue forward without needing immediate validation or visible results. And in doing so, you positioned yourself in a place where the correction could happen naturally, where the imbalance could resolve itself without you having to carry the burden of forcing it. This is what realignment looks like. It is not loud. It is not chaotic in the way people expect. It is precise, gradual, and deeply intentional, unfolding in layers that reveal themselves over time rather than all at once. You begin to see how every piece fits into a larger pattern, how the obstacles you faced were not random disruptions, but necessary points of pressure that revealed what was unstable, what was misaligned, what could not sustain itself in the long term. You see how the exposure that is happening now is not an act of punishment, but an act of clarity, a way of bringing things into alignment with what is real rather than what was constructed. And as you recognize this, it changes the way you hold your experience. It removes the need for resentment. It dissolves the desire to look back and measure what was done to you against what is happening now. Because you understand that what is unfolding is not about balancing a score. It is about restoring truth, about creating a foundation that is no longer influenced by distortion or manipulation. And from that understanding, a different kind of strength emerges, one that is not fueled by opposition, but by clarity. You are no longer moving in response to what others are doing. You are moving from a place that is grounded in your own alignment, your own awareness, your own understanding of what matters and what does not. This is where your energy shifts completely, because you are no longer carrying the weight of what happened as something that needs to be resolved through external outcomes. You are carrying it as something that has already served its purpose by shaping who you are now. And that shift frees you in a way that nothing else could, because it allows you to move forward without being tied to the past, without needing anything from those who were part of that phase of your journey. You are no longer waiting for acknowledgement, no longer expecting understanding, no longer holding on to the idea that something needs to be said or done for things to feel complete. Completion has already happened within you, through the process of seeing clearly, understanding deeply, and choosing to remain aligned regardless of what was happening around you. And from that place, your focus naturally moves forward, not as an escape from what happened, but as a continuation of what has been building all along. Because realignment is not just about correcting what was misaligned. It is about creating space for what is aligned to fully emerge. It is about allowing your path to unfold without the interference that once slowed it down. About stepping into a flow that is supported by clarity rather than disrupted by confusion. And as you move into this space, you begin to feel a different kind of momentum, one that does not require force, one that does not rely on constant effort to maintain, one that builds naturally as you continue to stay true to what you know. This is where the deeper purpose of everything you went through becomes visible, not as a lesson you had to learn in isolation, but as a process that prepared you to move forward with a level of awareness that changes how you experience everything that comes next. You are no longer navigating blindly, no longer reacting to every shift in your environment, no longer questioning your direction at every moment of uncertainty. You are moving with intention, with clarity, with a sense of grounding that allows you to remain steady even as things continue to evolve around you. And that steadiness is what sustains this new phase. Because while everything around you may continue to change, your alignment remains constant. Your understanding remains clear. Your sense of direction remains rooted in something that is not easily shaken. And from that place, you continue forward. Not as someone who was once blocked and is now free, but as someone who has moved through a process of transformation that has reshaped how you see, how you move, and how you exist within your own path. no longer defined by what tried to stop you, but fully aligned with what was always meant for you. And as you stand here now, looking back at everything that unfolded and forward into everything that is still opening for you, it becomes clear that this was never just a story about being blocked. It was a journey that revealed who you truly are when everything around you tried to redefine you. You walked through confusion without losing your direction, through resistance without losing your momentum, through hidden opposition without losing your integrity. And that is what makes this moment different from anything that came before. Because now, you are not waiting for things to change. You are witnessing the results of everything you have already become. And that shift changes how you move, how you think, and how you carry yourself in every space you enter. The same situations that once felt heavy now feel lighter. The same patterns that once confused you now make sense. And the same people who once doubted you are no longer able to define the narrative you live by. You are no longer reacting to what happens around you. You are responding from a place that is rooted, clear, and steady. And that is what allows everything else to fall into alignment without force. So as you continue forward, remember that nothing that tried to stop you was strong enough to define you. And nothing that is unfolding now is accidental or temporary. It is the natural result of consistency, awareness, and alignment coming together at the right moment. If this message resonated with you, take a moment right now to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment, "I was protected," as a declaration of what you have moved through and what you are stepping into. Not just as a reaction to this message, but as a confirmation of the truth you already feel within yourself. Because this is not the end of your story. It is the point where everything begins to move with you instead of against you. Where your path becomes clearer, your voice becomes stronger, and your presence becomes undeniable in a way that no one can block, delay, or take away from you anymore.